Chapter 10. Edward Gray paced the floor for the 100th time, then stared out the window at the blustery November day. The furrow of his distinguished brow deepened as he read the notes again from the last session with Brenda Campbell. He paraphrased the medical jargon as he read, arranging and rearranging it in his mind, forming a chronology of events. 16-year-old female, in good health, with strong constitution. Strong hell, he thought. She's a beautiful girl. And Edward Gray felt a most unfatherly urge, at which he scowled. Strong constitution, apparently abandoned by her parents at the age of 6 months. Left alone in an apartment for 1 week, suffering subsequent malnourishment and possible brain dysfunction. Lived with paternal grandparents for 10 years, developing normally, though shy and withdrawn. Slow but otherwise normal social development, probably due to the earlier trauma. Lifestyle radically changed at age 10 when natural father took Brenda to live with him through a succession of relationships, culminating in the marriage to Margot Campbell, the girl's present stepmother. Brenda became progressively more shy and withdrawn, resorting to smoking and heavy drinking from age 13 to present. A very bright young woman, probably resentful of the role taken by her stepmother, eager to find answers but cannot see how she creates many of her own difficulties within the family unit. Stepmother is often critical, to the point of physical abuse. The patient is masochistic, punishing herself for the loss of a natural mother she never knew. Neurotic substitute. Gray closed the folder again. He chewed his lip nervously, running the story over in his mind. There was something too easy about the diagnosis, and that bothered him. Lately, during the sessions, Gray had noticed disturbing thought patterns coming out in Brenda's conversation, things that did not fit the classic convenient mold. There had been a brief mention of something happening with her father when she was 4, which she would not elaborate on, and after that, all mention of the father dropped out completely. It was as if he did not exist. After 6 months of questioning, Gray had concluded the girl had little conscious memory of her father at all. James had revealed privately that no sexual relations had occurred between the two young people, that Brenda allowed no physical caressing at all. There had to be a reason, Gray muttered to himself, but what was it? He ran his fingers through his dark hair again, but the answer would not come. He reached for the intercom on his desk. "Miss Flannery, please send James and Brenda in." "Did you say both of them, Doctor?" the little box argued. "Yes, ma'am," Gray repeated irritably. "I know James usually waits outside, but I want both of them now." Gray watched as James opened the door for Brenda, whispering to her under his breath, almost as if they were in church. "It's all right, James. This isn't the last judgment. Come in and sit down." James smiled sheepishly, throwing one leg easily over the chair next to Brenda. "Sorry, Doc. Usually you just want to see Brenda Jean." James scanned the older man's face carefully, and his smile disappeared. "What's wrong?" Gray studied the faces across from him. Standing up, he walked slowly around the desk, sitting on the edge with a casual air he did not feel. "James, Brenda, let me get directly to the point. We've been seeing each other for 6 months, and we've made some progress." Gray paused, gauging his next remark. "Let me be frank with you. I think we have reached an ending point of sorts. I'm going to recommend that we stop the sessions for the time being." Brenda sat quietly, rubbing the backs of her hands as if they were dirty. "I'm not getting any better, Doc?" Brenda asked quietly. Gray watched only his patient. "Oh yes, remarkable progress has been made," the doctor pointed at Brenda as he spoke, "but so much more needs to be done. I think the underlying cause of your frigidity and alcoholism is one and the same, but you're holding back, my dear. Without your help, nothing more can be accomplished. Don't get me wrong, you have a much better understanding of yourself. You have come to terms with the abandonment as an infant, and I think James will agree you're more outspoken now than ever before. James tells me the weekend dry out was quite successful, and being sober is a huge step in the right direction." Brenda spoke softly, her eyes smoldering behind their infuriating veiled lids, with that look that Gray had never fathomed, for all his expertise. "Doc, it's okay. You tried. I appreciate what you and James have done for me. I've tried to explain how things are at home, and I know that Mom and Dad have problems, but it's okay. Sure, they say things sometimes, but it doesn't hurt. After a while... James turned, interrupting her. Don't tell me that, Brenda Jean. Don't you dare tell me it doesn't hurt. You bet it hurts. Every time your father cusses you out, every time your mother bitches at you for not keeping the whole damn house clean, it hurts a little. Now James stood up, his eyes blazing. The bad part is, it will keep on hurting. Just a little more, until finally there'll be nothing left of you in that house. Those people will run you in the ground, and you'll be standing there with your little puppy dog eyes saying, It's okay. Well, it's not okay, whether you want to admit it or not. Gray cleared his throat. Brenda Jean reached into her purse for a tissue. James glared at his companion. Brenda daubed her eyes, then looked apologetically at the doctor. Maybe later I'll be able to explain. Right now, I just need some time. Margot hated it when Alan or Elizabeth ran to Brenda for help instead of their own mother. It was disgraceful. She replayed the events of this afternoon. Alan had come screaming into the house from the beach, yelling something about coral in his foot. Margot had heard gruesome stories about live coral actually growing in human flesh. She was concerned, as any mother would be. Margot sat in her chair watching TV, expecting to see Alan any moment. Instead, she heard his feet on the stairs as he called Brenda's name. Brenda had run for him, gathering him in her arms and taking him to the bathroom, where she apparently dug the coral out with a razor blade. The child did not even scream from the pain, which must have been terrible. Louis sat next to his spouse, grumbling in his beer about a sergeant at work. Louis was always grumbling. Margot wondered how long this would go on. There was a good show she wanted to watch. Now he was threatening to spoil it. That O'Reilly's always on my ass about something, Louis muttered. It's getting to where I have to come home at lunch for a nap just to rest up for his afternoon bullshit. Now, Louis, Margot began, it isn't that bad, is it? You're damn right it is, Louis returned. And if that wasn't bad enough, Alan's always screwing around upstairs when I'm trying to sleep, making enough racket to raise the dead. Oh, Louis, he's just a baby, Margot cooed. And besides, I told you about him cutting his foot on the coral. I would have fixed it, but of course he always runs to Brenda. I don't care, Louis said, wiping his mouth with his undershirt. If it's not him, it's Dorothy, playing her damn record player till all hours. Well, they have a right to be in this house too, Margot screamed, dropping into her native German accent. You're not the only one who lives here. Margot glanced toward the washroom and her eyes narrowed. And besides, I never hear you blame your daughter for anything. Louis leaped to his feet. You think I always pick on your kids, don't you? So I never beat her ass, huh? Well, watch this, he said, sliding his belt from his pants. Brenda, get in here. Brenda was cleaning up the bathroom, and Louis had called her name again before she could get downstairs, the scrub brush still clenched in her hand. Yes, Daddy? What's this shit about not letting Alan's mother fix his foot? The cool, steely nerves Brenda had found to help Alan were quickly dissolving in the face of Louis' growing anger. Dad, I don't know. Alan just called for me, and I didn't think. You didn't think. I'm sick and tired of all these people just rushing around without thinking, doing all kinds of shit. Can't you leave things alone? Well, I'll teach you to meddle, Louis said, swinging his belt free with one hand and snapping it towards the girl. Brenda tried to explain, but there was no time. The belt came down hard on her shoulders, and she backed away from him instinctively, like a cornered animal. Louis chased her around the couch, flinging the leather strap with every stride. Brenda hardly felt the sting of the belt, but she knew there would be welts on her legs by morning. Her heart was in her throat, beating wildly. In the frenzy, she heard little Alan crying, but there was no time, no time. She kept one step ahead of her father, but this only infuriated him more. She felt the hair standing up on her arms. How long ago had she been peacefully at work, she thought blindly. It was only a few minutes. What had happened in the living room? Margot was watching the television, ignoring the other two. Louis was breathing heavily, like a wild animal. Brenda had been beaten before, but this time her father seemed enraged, engorged by some venomous hate that would not stop. Don't, Daddy, please stop, Brenda pleaded, but as she turned to face the raging man, the strap hit her across the chest, bruising her breasts cruelly. Brenda ran for the stairs. If I can only get to my room, Brenda thought. As she felt the first step, lights wheeled round, brilliant colors sparkling. Then there was blackness. As she reached the stairs, Lewis had swung the tail end of the belt with the buckle side up, catching Brenda in the middle of her back. A moment later he was upon her, but by then she had collapsed on the floor, unconscious. "Lewis, there was no reason to do that," Margot yelled, standing up and snapping the television off. "You shut up, you bitch. I should have hit you in the first place. You should have been fixing Alan's damn foot instead of sitting there glued to the TV." Lewis' last words were slurred as he dodged an ashtray. "Don't you get mad at me because you've had a bad day, you bastard. You stop yelling at people for no reason." Margot punctuated this statement by throwing a plate. She had moved to the kitchen. "Brenda?" Alan called from the bathroom timidly. Hearing no response, he had limped into the hallway, where a flying saucer bounced off a wall in front of him. Alan scurried to his room, sobbing. Dishes were thrown. Any ashtray not broken was scattered on the floor where it had landed. Margot threw a dinner fork at Lewis, which missed his head and made a perfect 4-point landing in the soft plasterboard by the front door. This went on for almost an hour. The battle cooled between Lewis and Margot only when the kitchen and living room arsenals had been heavily depleted. Red-faced, breathing heavily, Margot leaned against the overturned TV chair and pointed. "Better get Brenda upstairs, Lewis. Look at her. Slept through the whole think." Brenda had not moved from her crumpled position at the foot of the stairs since Lewis had caught her with the belt buckle. Lewis took her upstairs in his arms, still grumbling, but the blinding madness was gone. He laid her on the bed and returned downstairs to help clean up. Brenda awoke 3 hours later in maddening pain. Her side throbbed, perspiration covered her forehead in a blinding sheet of sweat. She felt a raging thirst. In her delirium, she heard James' voice. James came and took her in his arms, but his eyes were wide with fear. The girl turned her parched lips to his. "Alan," she murmured weakly. "Take Alan, hospital. Coral, foot, X-ray. Not me, Alan." James stood for a moment longer, puzzled by Brenda's words. "Alan?" "Alan, Brenda's stepbrother. He stepped on a piece of coral?" James walked to the other end of the hallway. He nudged open the door with his foot. "Alan, you in there?" Alan sat up slowly in the bed. "Mommy?" James switched on a table lamp and he could see instantly the swollen bandaged foot on the boy. James shuddered. Coral left in a foot could attach itself to the bone and turn the leg gangrenous in a matter of days. Damn Lewis Campbell and his plate throwing. "Alan," James said forcefully, "I'll take you to the hospital with Brenda Jean. Wait right here until I get back." The little boy nodded, but James had already gone. Brenda could feel his long, slender hands on her forehead, and she longed to touch them. She dreamed he carried her downstairs. She could hear Margot and Lewis in the living room, still yelling. Brenda felt a cool mist on her face. We must be outside, she thought. Time passed. How much she did not know, but the shadows fluttered before her in alternate patterns of dark and light. She heard James and another man talking. "I don't think she'll make it until morning," the man said. There was a stillness. Then Brenda heard James' voice, low and menacing. "If she dies, I'll kill that bastard." Shame on Jamie for using such language, Brenda thought, and her mind became a beautiful pink cloud, filled with silver dreams. James sat in the waiting room, still dazed from the events of the last several hours. Once more he replayed the day in his mind. Brenda had agreed to go out that evening. She didn't show up at the teen club, their usual meeting place. As much as he hated to, James drove to Lewis Campbell's house. As he approached, there were shouts and screams coming from inside, which he recognized as Margot and Lewis. James opened the door after his knocks went unanswered. Broken dishes were everywhere, glass and porcelain scattered at random in the living room. The battle had moved to the kitchen. This was announced by the clang of a 10-gallon roasting pot against the refrigerator. James knew better than try to stop Margot and her husband once they got into a fight. He was not concerned about them in any case. It's their life, he thought to himself as he picked his way up the stairs to Brenda's room. The door to her room was ajar. No lights could be seen. He had called her name, and hearing no answer, opened the door slightly. "Brenda?" The girl was sprawled on top of the bedclothes, her eyes glazed and unblinking in the dim half-light from the hall. "Brenda, good God, what happened?" She moved slightly. "I fell." James rushed to the bed, alarmed now to see the girl covered in a thin reddish fluid that reeked of ammonia. "She's lying in bloody urine," he said to himself. He felt her forehead. It was flushed and hot to the touch. James picked the girl up in his arms, moving to the door. James turned her waxen face to his and murmured, and the robotic smile chilled the boy to the marrow. It was then that she mentioned the boy Alan, and it was James who took Brenda and her stepbrother for treatment. At the bottom of the stairs, he could still hear Brenda's parents fighting. There would be no time to tell them now, he thought. Better get to a hospital as soon as possible. For the first time, James recalled the utter terror in Brenda's voice when she told him of her parents' squabbles, and he cursed himself for his flip reply. "All parents quarrel, Brenda Jean. I don't understand why you get so emotional about it." Now the full impact of her words reached him as he trudged into the pearl-like fog of the Okinawan winter. "Oh, Brenda, please forgive me," he said again and again as the car skidded wildly down the road to Kadena. "Please wake up, my love. Please remember me," he said through clenched teeth as the car roared down the turnpike. Alan sat in the back seat. "Mommy'll miss me," he moaned. "I doubt it," James replied over his shoulder. "Why didn't I listen?" he berated himself again, banging his fist on the windowsill of the hospital waiting room. In the distorted reflection of the glass, he could see a doctor coming down the hall. James stubbed out his cigarette in the tiny ashtray. "After she's discharged, I'll take her home with me," he swore inwardly. The doctor tried to explain the patient's condition as clearly as he could. Based on James' description and the bruises found on the girl, the doctor concluded that when she had fallen, the force had disconnected the tubes leading into the left kidney. Had treatment been sought immediately, something might have been done, but now... The surgeon tried to console the distraught young man, but he seemed completely undone. Brenda opened her eyes, expecting to see her favorite stuffed cat in the corner, and was amazed it was not there. She gazed at the strange room, trying to focus her eyes, but nothing seemed in its place. Even the window had moved, as a rising moon cast eerie shadows on the floor. "This is not my bed," she thought, blinking. "What's wrong with me?" Brenda said aloud, rubbing the grit from her eyes. An odd pain stabbed her right arm, and she saw a thin plastic tube running from it. "I'm in a hospital," she thought quietly. An hour had passed when the door opened gently. Brenda's heart leaped. "James!" she said weakly. James stood at the foot of her bed, as if rooted to the spot. "What's wrong? You look as if you've seen a ghost." The doctor stood up, disbelieving his instruments as he gently probed the damaged area. "I'll take some x-rays to make sure, but if I didn't know better, I'd say the disconnected kidney tube has actually begun to reconnect. If this continues, your condition will stabilize in a matter of hours. I've never believed in miracles, but..." James sat with Brenda on the hospital bed. "I took Alan down to the ER while the doctor was checking you out," he said softly. "While you were sleeping, I drove him back home. I told Margot you were in the hospital, and I swear she hardly blinked. I'm not sure she heard half of what I said." James shook his head, looking at Brenda for some explanation, then stopped. "She's the one who needs reassurance, dumbass. Get a hold of yourself." "Why didn't you tell me how bad it was at your house?" James said gently. "I had no idea. You should have seen the mess. They're probably still cleaning it up." Brenda looked earnestly into the boy's eyes, seeing the love there. Now she knew how close she had come to death, and nothing must bring her that close again. "James," she said, taking his hand, "let me explain." Should she tell him about the belt? No. James would make life hell for Lewis, who, in turn... Perhaps she could give James some information. After all, he deserved some explanation. "It's much worse. It's not just my parents fighting. I wish that's all it was. It all started when my daddy came to visit me in Frederick. Brenda poured out the tale of mindless violence that had been her life since Lewis took the 2 abandoned children from John and Betty McGuire. It was a story of 100 little disappointments. The bicycle from Granddaddy never recovered. The moves across the country, never settling into one school for more than 2 years. The friends never made. Margot's constant nagging, while her blood children were given the better clothes, the free time away from home, the compliments and congratulations that even adopted children crave. Brenda's eyes sparkled dimly with that mysterious look that baffled Dr. Gray. Margot is mean, but my daddy... Brenda choked on the words. Brenda Jean, it's all right, James said softly, handing her another tissue from the little side table. Brenda shook her head. Her long hair hid her sobs. She tried again. James, my daddy, he hurts me. Once again she had to stop, forcing out each word as if her lungs were on fire. You tell me how he always favors the other kids, Brenda Jean. That's not fair, but I know. You don't know, Brenda interjected, flinging her hair back. Her tear-stained cheeks glistened in the half-light of the room. My daddy hurts me, James. He hits me. James stepped closer, cradling her head in his arms, and her words were muffled now. He hits me. He hits me. I know, James said soothingly, rocking on the edge of the bed with Brenda's face laying swathed in his jacket. Her words were muffled. James could barely hear them. James. Yes. He hurt me. He hurt me. He raped me. James' grip tightened on her shoulders for an instant. He tried to back away, but Brenda held him, not showing her face. I don't want to see Jamie's face. I don't want to, she thought to herself. Brenda. Darling. Brenda's fingers loosened by inches. She slowly brought her face up to meet his in the darkness. His eyes looked so afraid, so unbelieving, so tender. Some of it I can remember, she said, shifting her gaze to her whitened knuckles around James' hand. But I don't want to remember. Don't you see, James? That's why I can't love you like I should. Brenda stood up and looked away, her voice bitter and dejected. I'm a waste, Jamie. I don't want to hurt you anymore. Just leave me. I'll understand. Brenda heard the springs on the bed creak as James walked to the window and stood silently. Brenda watched him, her lips trembling. She glanced into the corner closet where her soiled and ammonia-soaked clothing lay in a pile. Oh, James, it's just that I love you too much. I'm not good for you. The boy did not move. Brenda watched the back of James' head, waiting for him to turn to her. Had he turned to stone? She watched the back of his shirt, then his shoes, then the floor. It was no use. He was like all the others. Now he was just buying time, thinking of an excuse to say goodbye. The bastard. Just like all the others. I should have known better, Brenda thought, returning her hardened stare to James. Her tears were gone, and her lips were pressed in a thin line as she spoke now. Go ahead, she murmured, easing herself up on one elbow. Leave me like everyone else I've ever loved. See if I care. James turned away from the window. Brenda noticed the deep red flush in his cheeks. He was lost in his own Gethsemane while he watched that window. His face was impassive. Brenda could not tell what his expression meant. She only knew that he had made up his mind. I'll make another appointment with Dr. Gray, James said, slowly extending his arms to her, if you want to be with me. Brenda ran to him, flinging her arms around his neck, burying her face in his jacket, oblivious to the pain. Oh, James, she whispered. The two young people stood alone in the dimly lit room, James holding the girl as she wept the bitter tears of a secret sorrow she had never been able to share. She felt the warmth of his body, the security of his touch. For a moment the iron grip of her logical mind was released, and she gave in to a delicious feeling of warmth and contentment unknown before. Brenda raised her face to his. At once the old nausea returned, and she jerked away, disgusted at a man's touch. "I'm sorry," she murmured, shuddering at the smell of his maleness on her clothing. "Yeah." James turned back to the window, his face an icy mask. Brenda watched him light a cigarette in the darkness. Brenda put her coffee cup on the teak table in front of Dr. Gray's desk. James sat next to her, watching the older man. Gray sat on a corner of his ornate desk, one leg dangling. He pushed the reading glasses further up his aristocratic nose, scanning a bundle of flimsy papers. "The prognosis looks excellent." Gray paused, running one finger down a section of the paper. "Major Albertson says you have a 60% usage of the left kidney, and that's remarkable considering the nature of the injury." Brenda, feeling vaguely guilty, kept her head down, tracing the patterns in the carpet. "Brenda, James called me the day after you were released from the hospital." Gray noticed a slight tremor in the girl's expression. "After our last sessions, I suspected some degree of physical abuse at home, but the charge of rape indicates trauma of a far greater degree." Brenda looked up slowly, watching the doctor. "I already told you my father raped me last year. Don't you believe me?" Gray leaned forward in his chair, the muscles flexing behind his squared jaw. "I believe you, Brenda, but the charge of rape is one of the most difficult to prove in court." "Who said I wanted to go to court?" Brenda cried, gripping the edge of her chair. "You don't want to live at home after such an attack, do you?" Gray responded, his eyes narrowing. "No, I mean I do, of course, but..." "Of course, but what?" "I'm afraid for Alan and Elizabeth," Brenda said. "Can I have a cigarette?" "Certainly. In fact, I think I'll have a smoke with you," Dr. Gray replied, leaning forward in his armchair toward the humidor and pipe rack on his desk. "I'll be glad to help you drink some fresh coffee," James said, rising from his chair at a signal from the older man. "Great idea," Gray said, nodding. "Tell Miss Flannery to show you where everything is. She knows how I like mine." The room was silent as James closed the door to the outer office. "Getting back to Alan and Elizabeth," Gray continued, clasping his hands together. "Why are you afraid for them?" "Brenda?" The girl's lower lip trembled. Her features took on an ashen gray cast. She looked utterly terrified. At intervals she took drags from her cigarette, at last snuffing it out with short staccato strokes. "I worry about his temper. I worry about Elizabeth in that house." "You worry that the same thing might happen to her?" Gray asked. "That's right. Like I said, my father raped me a long time ago." "I thought you told me he raped you last year," Gray said quietly, watching her face. "You bastard," the girl thought as she returned the doctor's even gaze. "You know you're making me remember things." "Did I say that? I'm sorry, Doc." "I see. Well, the mind is a funny thing, you know. Very often a specific event gets confused in our conscious mind. I wouldn't worry about it if I were you." Brenda settled back in her chair, not satisfied with Gray's reply. Gray reached for the top drawer of his desk, pulling out a folder and laying it in front of him. Adjusting his reading glasses, he thumbed the pages meditatively, ignoring the girl. Except for the tick of the wall clock and the lazy curl of blue smoke from Dr. Gray's pipe, there was no other sound or movement in the room. Brenda coughed once, loudly. "All right, Doc. What game are you playing with me?" she said. Gray peered over the top of his glasses, the greenish orbs filled with innocence. "Why, my dear, whatever do you mean?" The door opened and James brought in a silver service, steam rising from the pot. The two young people busied themselves with the spoons and the tray as the doctor watched. "James?" "Yes, sir?" "James, there's another kind of approach I would like to take in our sessions, and it's only proper that I consult both of you before going any further." Gray paused, watching the boy and girl exchange glances. "What is it?" Brenda said, her fingers tightening on the cup automatically. Gray leaned back in his swivel chair, intertwining his fingers behind his head. "Brenda, We talked for over 6 months, and though we made some progress, I think it would be useless to continue as before." Brenda moved as if to protest, but Gray waved her aside. "Let me finish. I think that if we use hypnosis, we may be able to discover many of the underlying reasons for your alcohol problem and your ambivalent feelings toward James." Brenda sighed. She pinched the bridge of her nose, squelching the tears in her eyes. "If you do this, you'll know everything about me, won't you?" Dr. Gray held his square palms in front of him, as if to ward off her accusation. "Brenda, you may be afraid of hypnosis, but don't be. There's a popular belief that no one can be hypnotized unless they want to. That's basically true. The conscious mind acts as a filter, blocking any thoughts that would be damaging to the psyche." Gray stood up and began pacing the floor rapidly as he spoke. "Our basic goal would be to isolate trauma in your life that could account for the onset of your alcohol addiction and your frigid behavior toward James. All sessions will be tape recorded. No one except you, myself, and perhaps James will be present during the session. I may ask James to stay in the waiting room until we're finished. I want him here to help me evaluate tapes as needed and give moral support afterwards. Whether or not you hear the tapes will be at my professional discretion. The tapes will remain absolutely confidential. How does it sound so far?" "Okay," the girl acknowledged. "James?" "Sounds good to me," the boy replied. "Very good." Gray clapped his hands together, striding across the plush carpet. "Let me call Miss Flannery. We'll start at once." The doctor clicked off the tape recorder, laid down his pen and ran his hands through his hair, trying to calm the feeling of rage that swept over him as he reread the handwritten notes. Restless, unable to stay still, he turned and marched toward the shelf filled with delicate figurines, the same ones Brenda had touched so lovingly 6 months ago. Dr. Gray closed his hands absently upon one of them, an exquisite statue of Eros, the winged messenger of love. The memory of this latest session lay like a burning ember in the forefront of Gray's mind, and he could not blot it out. His hand closed inexorably upon the tiny Cupid, and the dark look on his face was that of an enraged Zeus. Moments later, Miss Flannery heard a single, piercing crash. She paused at her typewriter. "Doctor?" There was no response. Pushing back her chair, Miss Flannery moved swiftly to the office door, then called louder, her lips almost touching the wood. "Edward?" Frowning, she opened the door and looked in. The room appeared quiet and unoccupied. The clock ticked as before on the wall by the bookcases. Next to the window lay a shattered porcelain statue, one of Gray's treasured figurines. The doctor sat immobile in his chair, glaring across the room, his hands folded tent-like against his chin. "Dr. Gray, what in the world?" "Never mind," Gray said roughly, his voice a controlled rumble. "Get James Thomas on the phone. I'll take the call in here. I want to see him as soon as possible. Cancel all afternoon appointments." Gray wheeled his chair away from the astounded secretary, who stood in the doorway for a moment and then disappeared around the corner to her desk. "It's unbelievable," he said inwardly, still unable to comprehend the horror of the words he had just transcribed. Gray walked to the window, watching the bustle of the afternoon traffic as he replayed the Brenda Campbell tape again in his mind. "How old are you, Brenda?" "I'm 10 years old." "Can you tell me where you live?" "Sure. I live with grandmother and granddaddy. We live in a big brick house in the country." "Can you describe the house for me, please?" "Well, there's a little cedar tree in front, beside the driveway. Granddaddy's car is always parked there. He drives a big blue car with white trim. He calls it a Oldsmobile. Junior and I love to jump off the back of the driveway and roll down the hill behind our house. We have to make sure we don't fall into Grandma's garden, though. She'll tan our hide." "Your grandmother has a garden?" "No, I mean Grandma. You know, grandmother's mother." We catch fireflies in her garden. Keep 'em in jars at night. Did you know that if you pinch off their rear end, they stay lit up for a long time? Gray persisted. What do you mean she'll tan your hide? She's real mean, but only if you don't do what you're supposed to. She reads to me at night if I can't sleep. Brenda, that's wonderful. Relax and let yourself dream. Wonderful dreams. When I count 3, you will be 12 years old. Ready? 1, 2, 3. You are 12. Can you tell me where you are, Brenda? I'm in bed. Are you asleep? No, I'm leaking. Can you tell me why you're leaking? I don't want to. It's okay to tell. I want to help you. My daddy hurt me again. He's gone now, but he was here a minute ago, and he hurt me like always. I don't know why he likes to hurt me. Please don't cry, Brenda. I will make it better if I can. Can you tell me how he hurt you? He comes into my room when nobody is around. He tells me to lay down on the bed and be his good little girl. Then he takes my skirt off. He pulls my panties off. He makes me get on my knees and look at the headboard. My legs shake, but I'm too scared to fall down. He yelled at me for doing that. Brenda, what did your daddy do then? Then I heard the unzipping sound. He's taking his pants off. I can hear it. I'm so afraid. Please tell him to stop. Brenda, I think he's listening to me, but he hasn't stopped yet. What is he doing now? He's pressed against me. He's holding me around the middle like a sausage. Oh, it hurts. It hurts. Please don't pull my hair, Daddy. I promise to be good. I promise. Ow, he did it again. Don't. My legs feel so heavy and he won't get off. He's pulling my shirt. He put his hands inside. Oh, he's hurting me. I don't know what hurts more, my front or my back. I can feel a trickle down my legs. It's his sweat running down my legs. It tickles, but I can't reach there. He won't let me. I can't do anything. I can feel his face against my back, and it hurts where his whiskers are. He says to spread my legs wider, but they are already. Last night he was so heavy I peed the bed. Oh, please, Daddy, don't make me pee the bed. I won't tell. He says he loves me and I should love him, and I do, but I don't when he does this. My eyes are watering now. Oh, I wish I could wipe them, but I can't. He told me to keep my arms straight. Oh, my eyes burn. They burn, and he won't stop. Brenda, it's all over now. Do you hear me? Your daddy has gone now. Relax. Relax and dream. Wonderful dreams. When I count 3, you will look at the clock by your bed and your daddy will be gone for a long time. 1, 2, 3. Are you alone in your bed now? Yes. You said you're leaking? Yes. When Daddy finishes, stuff runs down my leg for a long time. It's kind of like pee-pee, but it's not. It's slimy and it smells. Daddy says that's what happens when people love each other, and I should be happy, but I'm not. This makes a mess on my bed. I'll have to change the sheets and wash them before Margot finds out. You didn't make him stop. Why didn't you make him stop? Brenda, I will talk to him and try to make him stop, okay? I guess so. Can I go to sleep now? I've got to get up early tomorrow and get Alan and Elizabeth ready for school. Yes. You may go to sleep, Brenda. Relax and dream. Wonderful dreams.